I'm Kathy with Quiltable. I'm here today to talk about the new print-at-home quilting patterns from Quiltable.com. You'll download your pattern and print it on your home printer. With your pattern will come 4 instruction sheets at the very beginning. There is a page for print-at-home design, just basic instruction, one for your movable long arm, one for assembling the pattern, and one for your stationary or domestic machine. So your stationary long arm or domestic machine. Really easy to follow, very simple instructions. You can print this one time and save it and never print it again, or you can print it with each pattern. It's your choice. The next part of your pattern is the pattern itself. You're going to notice that it has alignment markings on it so you can quickly line it up. It is numbered page numbers so that you can put it together correctly, and it is printed on 8.5 by 11 paper. Now the quilt I'm going to do today is about 36 inches long. My paper is 8.5 inches wide, so I know I'm going to need about 5 pattern pieces to get the width of my quilt. So I'm going to start putting my pattern together. It's very easy. We're going to take page 1, page 2, and align them. And we're just going to butt the edges up with clear tape because we're going from the front. I'm going to put that right to the edge. I'm just going to put a piece of tape there, a piece of tape at the bottom to secure it, and then I like to run one piece all the way down the page because I'm going to roll this up and reuse it on my next quilt. Get it nice and smooth and flat. Now when you're taping your pattern pieces, you're going to notice there's a little gap at that fraction of an inch that doesn't print to the edge of the paper. You can take a black marker and you're just going to quickly complete that line. You don't have to do this. If you're very comfortable with your pattern and you can just follow with your eyes, you can leave that space there. It's not very big. And this one comes down like that. So I'm just going to fill that in for my quilting. I'm going to go to my next page and I'm going to get a total of 5 pages taped together. If you like to tape your patterns from the back so that you don't have tape on the front, washi tape, also known as paper masking tape that you can get in an art supply store, works really well. It's repositionable. If you mess up, you can peel it off and start over. So here is page number 5, my last page. And now my pattern is ready to take to the long arm and put on my frame. We've printed our Pantograph design and taped it together. You can also tape it at the frame. It's a lot easier to work on this long surface than it is a small table, and you'll know what size you want to get to. I've already got mine taped. The instructions give you the order. When you put it on the frame, the number 1 first page is going to go on your right. That's our starting page. The number will be upside down and at the bottom of the paper. My extra pages, if I need to add them, are right here with me. I can quickly tape those on if I need any more. Now my frame, I have installed some plastic on it. I like this because I can mark on the plastic with a dry erase marker. I can put tape on it, I can wipe it off and remove it, and it's not going to damage my pattern. I like to save my patterns and reuse them, but you can always reprint pages if you need to. And so if you've marked a page and you've actually marked on the page itself, you find the markings distracting, you can reprint that page and tape it in place of the old page. To start stitching our quilt, we need to find the top corner of our quilt. So we're going to look at the front, and the taller and longer you are, the easier this is. So I'm going to put my needle right up here, and I am going to sink it down in the quilt so it doesn't move. It's right there. I'm going to use my laser now, and I'm going to use my paper pattern, and I'm going to align it to that top corner of the quilt. I'm going to fold my plastic back a little bit so I can manipulate this. And I actually want to quilt off the edge of my quilt a little bit so that it doesn't just have an abrupt edge. So I am going to start a little to the right of my starting point off the quilt. Now you'll notice this pattern is nested. It goes down and up, down and up, down and up. On your pattern, on your aligning pattern, you can actually just go back and stitch this part in after you've stitched the first row to fill in that top, or we can advance backwards, and we'll cover that in a few minutes. Needles in the quilt, liking where this is, I'm going to actually take my flowers off the top of the quilt. If you end up with a partial pattern at the top, but not a partial pattern at the bottom, it can be kind of glaringly obvious. If I have a whole flower here, I get down to the bottom and I have a little bit. So if I divide that between the top and the bottom and don't make it perfect, it becomes less noticeable. I'm going to use my laser, and this is where I want top right is going to be right there on this one. So my laser light is pointing. It's the same as my needle on my machine is corresponding with the laser light. So this is exactly where my laser and my needle line up. That's what I want to keep going. I'm going to raise my needle now. And I'm going to mark my quilt. So I want to come to the edge of my quilt. And I'm going to grab my dry erase marker, my ruler, and this is the edge of my quilt. I'm going to draw a line. That way I know where to start and stop over here. I need to do the same thing at the other end, because when I get into this, I'm quilting away, I quilt right off the edge of the quilt and don't even realize it because I'm watching my pantograph, not my quilt. I'm going to do a different method at this end of the quilt just to show you another way to do it. I'm going to come down to this edge. Oh, we need to do a little more basting. Okay. Put my needle on the edge of the quilt, and I'm going to line my ruler up with that laser. This time I'm going to use some tape to mark it. If you get the artist's paper tape, you can put this directly on the paper pattern so that you can peel it off and remove it as needed. And I'm coming out just a hair because I want to go off the edge of that quilt. And that is when I know where to stop when I get to the end. Okay. Now before we start, it's always a good idea to get to know your pantograph pattern. Looks really simple when you're looking at it, but once you start stitching, it can be difficult to tell where you're traveling next. So I'm just going to follow my pattern, and the key to pantograph quilting is to do a smooth, fluid motion. I'm not trying to stay exactly on that line, it's a guideline. If I try and go really slow and stay right on it, I'm going to get a very jerky look to my quilting. So I just want to be smooth and flowing. If I come off it a little bit, whoops, I don't want to jerk back. I just want to kind of gently go back. Most of the time you won't see those little imperfections because no one is looking at the paper pantograph pattern when they're looking at your finished quilt. So we're just going to follow that down the quilt. Remember to breathe as you go. It's really easy to hold your breath and get very tense. I'm going to be nice and loose. Stepping is probably the most challenging part, but you do want to keep even with your machine. You don't want it to get ahead of you out here because it's really hard to quilt that way. I'm going to follow down. So I think I've got a pretty good feel for this pattern. I really like it because it's very flowing and loose. It's very easy to follow, not a lot of backtracking or overstitching. So this is a really good edge-to-edge design for beginners. This pattern is Spineless Feathers 1 Pantograph. Okay, I feel pretty comfortable right now. I think I'm ready to start quilting. Now I am fortunate to be taller. I can do pretty much everything from the back of the machine. Not everyone can do that. You might need to, especially on a larger pattern, go to the front to pull up your thread. Not a problem. Just get a little exercise in that day. So my start point is going to be where my line crosses my stitching. That's where I'm going to pull up my thread. And as I'm doing this, you might see behind me, there's a bunch of scribbling back here on my quilt. That is where I set my tension before I started quilting. So that's already done and taken care of. I don't need to worry about it while I'm working on the quilt. I'm going to do a couple little tie-off stitches to secure the thread in place. Trim my ends. And I am ready to quilt. Now you may notice on this pattern, I chose not to go in and complete the lines at the page joints where the printer margin occurs. This pattern is very easy to follow, and I didn't feel that it was necessary to add those lines. I can kind of tell from the beginning of one line to the end of the next line without having filled that in. This is very relaxing to me. This is a great way to learn muscle memory for future quilts. As I do this feather, it's becoming a very fluid movement. It's a great way to teach yourself free motion quilting, as well as complete a quilt with a pantograph pattern. And I see my tape coming up, so I'm kind of preparing myself for the end of the quilt here. Remember, I did put that tape a little bit off the edge of the quilt, so I know when I finish right here, I should be out of the quilt and ready to stop. Now you've completed a row of your quilt, you're ready to advance. Each Longarm manufacturer has different instructions for advancing the quilt on the frame. Visit your Longarm manufacturer or search the internet for video on how to advance your quilt or quilt from the back. You should find lots of good information that way. I hope you enjoyed this video on how to create a pantograph pattern using quiltable, downloadable, printable designs. We can't wait to see what you've made.